My niece ghosted me after her parents passed, ignoring every call and letter. Then, one day, she messaged, "Hey, I need the family estate transferred to my name." When I refused, she showed up at my door with a lawyer. But the papers I handed her in return made her stumble back. A few years ago, my niece Sarah cut me out of her life. It wasn't a slow fade, it was abrupt, calculated. Calls unanswered, messages left unread, letters returned to sender. This wasn't just teenage rebellion, she was 21, old enough to know what she was doing. I wasn't just an uncle to her, I practically raised her when my brother and his wife, her parents, passed away in a car crash. I stepped up, took her in, and gave her everything I could. I wasn't rich, but I made sure she never wanted for anything. Then, out of nowhere, silence. No explanation, no fight, just gone. I spent 2 years reaching out, hoping it was a phase, hoping she'd remember who had been there for her. And then, just when I'd started to accept that maybe I'd never hear from her again, I got a message. "Hey, I need the family estate transferred to my name." Not "Hi uncle," not "Sorry for disappearing," just a demand. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. The estate, of course, the only reason she'd ever reach out. I wasn't going to let this go unanswered. "We need to talk, come by." The next day, she showed up at my door. She wasn't alone. A man in a stiff suit stood beside her, briefcase in hand, a lawyer. I opened the door and took them in. Sarah looked different. Designer clothes, perfect nails, styled hair. The girl I had raised wore jeans and old band t-shirts. This woman. She looked like she hadn't worked a day in her life. "We don't need to talk," she said, brushing past me into the house. "We just need you to sign." The lawyer set his briefcase on my coffee table and flipped it open, pulling out a stack of papers. "Mr. Whitaker," he began in that rehearsed, condescending tone lawyers use when they think they're dealing with an idiot. "As you are aware, your brother's estate was intended to pass to Sarah, upon her reaching legal adulthood. We'd like to finalize that transfer today." Sarah didn't even look at me. I let out a slow breath, keeping my voice calm. "That's not how this works." The lawyer barely reacted, just gave me a polite, insincere smile. "Actually, it is. The estate was meant to go to Sarah, but due to certain legal complications at the time of your brother's passing, it was placed under your name, temporarily. Now that Sarah is of age, we'd like to move forward with the proper transfer." Sarah finally looked at me then, not with warmth, not with the affection of a niece seeing her uncle after years of silence, just cold expectation. "We?" I asked, raising a brow. "My fiancé and I," she said, as if I should have already known. Fiancé. That was new. I kept my face neutral, nodding as if I was considering it. Then, I walked over to my desk, pulled out a folder, and set it down in front of them. "Before we do anything," I said, "you should probably read these." Sarah rolled her eyes but grabbed the papers, skimming them quickly. The lawyer leaned over, reading along. I watched their faces carefully. The change was instant. Sarah's confidence wavered first, her eyebrows drawing together. The lawyer's mouth pressed into a thin line, scanning faster. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, he stiffened, inhaling sharply. "What is this?" Sarah snapped. I leaned back against the couch, crossing my arms. "That, Sarah, is the updated will your father had drawn up 2 months before he died." She blinked. "That's not possible." "Oh, but it is," I said, tapping the paper. "Your father and I had a long talk when you were 16. He had concerns." Her lips parted slightly. The lawyer was the one who spoke. "This will invalidate the previous terms." His voice was quieter now, less confident. "Correct," I nodded. "It states that the estate is to remain in my name indefinitely. It was amended to include a clause, one that requires you to meet specific conditions before any transfer can be considered." Sarah's hand clenched the papers. "That's not fair," I shrugged. "It's legal." The lawyer closed his briefcase with a sharp snap. "Mr. Whitaker, we'll be contesting this in court," I smiled. "Go ahead." Sarah's jaw tightened. "You had no right." "I had every right," I cut in, "and you know it." She exhaled sharply, slamming the papers onto the table. "This isn't over." I tilted my head. "Oh, I know, but before you go, you should read the next page." She snatched it up, eyes flicking across the words. Then, she paled. I watched her swallow hard, her breathing quickened, her hands shook. "What is this?" she whispered. The lawyer reached for it, but she yanked it back, clutching it to her chest. I didn't rush her. I let the weight of it sink in, let her absorb what it meant. Because that page, that was the final nail in the coffin. And the best part, she had no one to blame but herself. Sarah's face went pale as she gripped the paper. Her eyes darted over the words again and again, like she was trying to make them say something else. The lawyer leaned in, reading over her shoulder. His expression didn't change much, but the way his lips pressed together told me everything I needed to know. She knew she was screwed. "You," Sarah started, but her voice broke. She swallowed and tried again. "You tricked me." I let out a short laugh. "Tricked you?" "No, Sarah, I just did what your father asked me to do." I honored his last wishes. Her hands curled into fists. "This can't be real, he would have told me." I stared at her, waiting for her to really hear what she had just said. And then it hit her. If he didn't tell her, it was because he didn't want her to know. The lawyer exhaled through his nose and straightened up. "Mr. Whitaker, I'd like to request a copy of these documents. We'll need to verify their authenticity." "Go ahead," I said, walking to the filing cabinet and pulling out a second copy. "Take your time." Sarah didn't say a word. She just stood there, breathing heavy, staring at the paper like it had betrayed her. Then, she turned on her heel and stormed out. The lawyer followed, moving slower, more careful. At the door, he turned back. "Expect to hear from us soon," I smiled. Looking forward to it. The war begins. I expected her to fight. I didn't expect how far she was willing to go. The first move came fast, a letter from her lawyer, full of legal jargon meant to intimidate me. They wanted the estate turned over immediately, claiming the revised will was invalid due to undue influence. I ignored it. Then came the calls, first from the lawyer, then from Sarah, then from unknown numbers. I blocked them all. And then, the real attack came. I woke up one morning to find the front door of the estate wide open. At first, I thought I had forgotten to lock it, but as I stepped inside, the air felt wrong. I moved carefully, my stomach twisting. And then I saw it. The office had been ransacked, papers everywhere, drawers pulled out, my desk overturned, and the filing cabinet pried open. I felt cold all over. Someone had broken in, and I had a good guess who sent them. I called the police, of course, reported a break-in, told them about the missing documents. They took notes, looked around, and then asked me if I had any cameras. I didn't. That was my mistake. But what Sarah didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I never kept the originals in the office. The real copies. They were locked up in a safe deposit box at the bank. What they stole were just copies. Sarah was playing dirty, so I played dirtier. Time to strike back. I didn't go to the police with accusations, that would have been stupid. No proof, no case, but I had another idea. The next day, I went to the estate's lawyer, the one who handled my brother's affairs before he passed, a man named Harold Pierce. Old, sharp, and not easily intimidated. "Harold," I said, dropping into the chair across from his desk, "I need to make some changes." He leaned back, eyes narrowing. "Sarah," I nodded. He sighed and steepled his fingers. "I told your brother this would happen." We spent the next 2 hours going through every loophole, every safeguard, every option. By the time I left his office, I had one thing in my pocket that Sarah wasn't expecting, a restraining order. If she wanted to fight, she was going to have to do it from a distance. The next twist. I thought that would be enough to keep her away. I was wrong. 3 days later, I got a call from Harold. His voice was tight. "She just filed a lawsuit." I almost laughed. "On what grounds?" "Fraud. She's claiming the will was forged." For a second, I didn't say anything. Then, I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temple. "Tell me you're kidding." "I wish I was. A forged will." That was serious. If she somehow managed to convince a judge to even consider it, I could lose everything. But here's the thing. Sarah had made one fatal mistake. She underestimated me. Because I knew she was coming for me, and I had one last